Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone in the franchise world. My name is Paul Segreto, and this is Franchise Today. Exciting time at Franchise Today, as we have today as our guest Mark Liston, president of Glass Doctor. Of course, we know they're part of the Dwyer Group. Before we get to that, I'd like to turn it over to my co-host, Stan Friedman, and give us a little bit of the front of the house and some breaking news, Stan.
And breaking news it is, Paul, as just moments before we went live, a press release hit my inbox from the Hill announcing the effective immediately resignation of Steve Caldera as the CEO of the IFA. I guess we're going to be learning a whole lot more as the day progresses, and all of us that will be together here at Springboard in Philly will include Brad Fishman, who I'm certain is going to be able to tell us a lot more from the world of PR as this thing unfolds. But effective immediately, the IFA announces Steve Caldera has stepped down and resigned his post, and that Robert Crescente, who is the head of government relations for the IFA, will step in as interim COO, and that the board is appointing a selection committee to begin an immediate search for a replacement. And this, of course, comes just 2 weeks out on the Franchise Action Network, which we were going to talk about and probably will more at the back of the house today, toward the back end of the show following our interview with Mark. But this is some very, very unexpected breaking news, and the timing of it, of course, is rather unique in front of Franchise Action Network coming up on Capitol Hill for franchising just 2 weeks out. So that just hit us as late breaking. What I had planned to do at the front of the broadcast and the front of the podcast today was to scrap our format this week and not go into any depth or detail about some of the other things that were coming across the news wire, in favor of dedicating the front of the program today to franchising's loss this week of a major icon, Paul, with the death of Subway co-founder Fred DeLuca, who passed away on Monday. As many in the franchising world know, Fred had been receiving treatment for leukemia for the past couple of years. And in June, his sister Suzanne Greco was named Subway president, taking over the day-to-day operations in Milford. While Fred remained titled as CEO, the day-to-day went to his sister. Fred's story has been a real inspiration to those who've ever heard it. 50 years ago, when as a 17-year-old high school graduate, Fred went into the sandwich business with Dr. Peter Buck, who was a family friend and a nuclear physicist, no less. And Peter had actually loaned Fred $1,000 to open his first store in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And it was Buck's idea, doing this to help Fred pay his way through college. Well, if we fast forward the tape to a half century later, Subway today boasts more than 42,000 units worldwide. In 1974, DeLuca and Buck turned to franchising as the business model to foster growth of the brand, what they then thought would be nationwide, which, by the way, was originally called Pete's Super Submarines before the Subway brand was even born. And according to the Wall Street Journal, by 2002, Subway had overtaken McDonald's in its unit growth globally, and Forbes magazine reported Fred's net worth at an astounding $3.5 billion, ranking him as 259th for personal wealth in the USA. And Paul, while the brand's taken some heat recently, what with all the Jared thing and challenges that Subway has faced in the competitive set from other competitors like Jersey Mike's and Firehouse, Jimmy John's, Fred DeLuca's passion for the business, and for that matter for franchising at large, always trumped any bumps in the road that he faced along the way. And for those of us that were privileged to know him, that passion was really hard to beat. In fact, my former CEO and good friend Tony Conza, the founder of rival Blimpie Subs and Salads, always used to teach us and preach to us there are two essential things that an entrepreneur in any business needed to bring with him to the party. One was obviously money, and the other was passion. And clearly, Fred DeLuca had plenty of both. In fact, he so loved franchising that he often would light the room up when he'd speak to an audience of first-time attendees during the orientation sessions at every year's IFA convention. And those newly minted franchisors would see DeLuca come into the room, and it was like they were suddenly in the presence of a rock star. I mean, they would stand in awe of the fact that he was even in the room. And then Fred would do his magic. He'd get up to the podium, he'd light up that smile and that sparkle in his eyes as he'd tell his story. And he would share with every one of those newbies how he was just an everyday Joe. And that if he could do what he did, going from onesies and twosies to dozens and then hundreds, and from hundreds to thousands and on, so could you too. So Fred DeLuca, I'd say we all lost a friend to franchising, and he will be remembered as a true pioneer, an innovator, a mentor to, and a friend to countless individuals, much less, for that matter, to the IFA and to the business model of franchising itself, which he so loved and which he was so successful at. So let's just end this portion of our podcast today by dedicating this podcast to the memory of Fred DeLuca. Rest in peace, Fred. We're going to miss you.
Absolutely, Stan. Very well said. The outpouring of love and best wishes and thoughts and prayers online throughout all the social media channels has been quite unbelievable, as have the stories. And a couple that I'd like to talk about, Jennifer Cashel, who we know is behind the Next Gen franchising initiative. She writes, Fred was very private and extremely humble, despite building the biggest restaurant brand in the world. Intimate experiences like where he spoke to young entrepreneurs were so precious and always left such an impression on all whom his advice and wisdom touched. Thank you to everyone who helped get his story out to the world and into the schools globally. This is a man who should go down in history not just for being one of the most successful entrepreneurs ever, but an extraordinary man who loved meeting new people, analyzing personalities, interviewing people for fun, exploring new ideas, and offering his advice so gracefully and simply. And with just a few words, he could leave a lifelong impression on anyone. Thankfully, he never missed an opportunity to visit stores or go exploring anywhere he traveled. So he met more people than most ever will and created more jobs, entrepreneurs, and fans than anyone I've ever met. He'll be so dearly missed. Fred, very well said, Jennifer. And, my own story, I didn't know Fred that well, unfortunately, but I did meet him, I believe it was 2010, when the IFA convention was in San Antonio. And I was really amazed during a tweet-up that Fred went out of his way to show up with a small group of tech geeks, so to speak, at the time, and wanted to learn all he could about Twitter. And it just set me back saying, here's a man, he's at the top of the world, and he still wants to learn, but it was also the way he went about it and really engaged with everybody. And we had just a brief exchange of words. And a year later, when he saw me, and again, we had just met for a brief time, he recalled the conversation, he remembered my name, and we had a nice 5 to 7 minute conversation about the progression of social media, and that really stood with me long afterwards. And one last quote that I saw on Facebook yesterday, and it was a quote that I kind of led into on my own, and I wrote, when referring to the great success of Disney, the famous quote is, it was all started by a mouse. When referring to the greatness of Subway, I read today another great quote. It all started with a kid from New York City who wanted to be a doctor. Rest in peace, Fred. Your legacy is sure to be an inspiration for many exploring entrepreneurship for years to come.
Paul, I first met him in 1997, and I can remember the day because it was my first week on the job at Blimpie, and my first assignment when I joined Blimpie in 97 as National Director of Franchising was to attend the Blimpie convention in Miami. To my shock, the first evening, I was told that I was going to be joining a couple of the Blimpie executives for a little cruise down the Intracoastal on a boat called Subconscious. And that boat was Fred DeLuca's boat. Chuck Lenis was then our executive VP of Blimpie, and he was the president then he was on the IFA board, but he was also the president of the New York State Restaurant Association then, and Chuck and Fred had a deep connection, and we talk about it all the time in franchising, how amazing it is that we can get in the room with competitors and be as open and as sharing as we are at convention. But even here, my first week at a new job with a company whose head-on competitor in the direct competitive set, we're cruising down his boat as opening night celebration of our Blimpie Subs and Salad convention. It blew my mind. Another thing about Fred that I learned later, and I've learned a lot through my years of actually having brief exposures to him at industry events, and friends like Bob Ritter, who's now heading franchising for Lenny's. Bob and Fred were very close friends, and Ritter got an awful lot of mentoring and friendship and direction and career guidance over the years, which Fred was just so willing to give. People like Jerry Darnell, who we both know and revere, has talked endlessly to me about the years of connection and mentoring that he's gotten from Fred. And Fred was somebody who I always knew was dollar conscious. He had a whole lot of money in that $3.5 billion, but boy, I'll bet he knew where every dollar of that money was. Yep. At most any moment in time. And I had a little fun this morning just doing some quick arithmetic on what does $3.5 billion look like. Well, it could look like 700 million $5 footlongs. It could look like 233,000 initial $15,000 franchise fees for a Subway franchise. It's just such a big number. How do you wrap your head around $3.5 billion? But I will tell you that man worked for it, that man earned it, and that man's passion built that brand. And he's done a lot of wonderful other things, as you so aptly articulated with the work that he's done with Jennifer and Next Gen all by itself. So we could go on for days, much less hours, talking about all the wonderful things that Fred DeLuca brought to franchising and to the sandwich space. And I just hope that these memories that we share will prompt some others and that others will share too and post to the blog.
Yeah, it's interesting that when Steve Jobs passed, his co-founder at Apple, Steve Wozniak, was asked, will there ever be another Steve Jobs? And because of the way the economy has gone and the uncertainty, he paused and he thought and he said, typically I would say no. But in light of so many unemployed and underemployed individuals with such talent and such entrepreneurial drive, not only do I think there'll be another Steve Jobs, I think there'll be another Bill Gates, I think there'll be another Ellison, I think there'll be another Zuckerberg, and so on. And I think because of that, and as Jennifer pointed out, his work with the younger generation, I look forward to many, many more individuals that follow in the path of Fred DeLuca. But yet, I don't think there'll be anyone to ever replace Fred DeLuca. And as we talk about Subway and Fred DeLuca, I mean, we all know about the culture of the organization, the culture of the man. And this week on Franchise Today, the topic is culture. And, who better to discuss this with both of us today, Stan, is someone from a franchise organization that we know lives and breathes culture and everything that are key components to culture. And our guest fits the bill perfectly, and from an organization, the Dwyer Group, that epitomizes the right culture in franchising. So returning to franchise today is Mark Liston. And for those that don't know Mark, he's been in franchising since 1981. He's been very involved with the International Franchise Association in a variety of roles. He's currently on the Board of Governors for the Certified Franchise Executive Board, having served as chairman of the board for 2 years. He's also on the Educational Foundational Board of Trustees. Previously, he served the VetFran and Marketing and PR committees. Mark, welcome back to Franchise Today.
Paul, thanks. Stan, nice to hear from you again. I'm sorry you couldn't get Dina because she's the real one who's going to talk about culture, but I'll always go second to Dina. It's great. A quick story about DeLuca. I remember back in Orlando in 2008 when Brian Scudamore, the CEO of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, got the Entrepreneur of the Year award. I'm sure you guys remember. He's on stage and he's talking about he met DeLuca in an IFA convention, and he's talking to him, and DeLuca says, "If I can help you at all, let me know." And he gave Brian his cell phone number on a piece of paper. Mm-hmm. So as you talk about cultures, it's people like that helping the other person grow. It's amazing. Yes, it'll be a big loss for franchising and for the world.
Absolutely.
Couldn't have been more.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Dina, I know when we start off there, I know Dina has a big speaking engagement coming up at TCU. Can you share a little bit of that, Mark?
I don't even know about it, to be honest with you.
Know about it?
But you see, it's Baylor here, so we don't focus on anything in Waco, Texas besides Baylor. This big rivalry, and so I'm sorry, I can't say those things. Otherwise, you get thrown out of Waco. You guys know that.
Well, I read a press release which I pulled off of franchising.com that told me that Dina has been honored with speaking about values to a group of executives of the Tandy Corporation at TCU coming up in October, that she's going to be keynoting or speaking at their conference and bringing the discussion of values of the Dwyer Group to the attention, the ears, and to the audience of executives from Tandy. And I mean, that's a pretty proud moment. I think that's the kind of speaking engagement that you can't get paid enough money to do, the ones that are like that.
And Dina is so quiet about those things. She'll come back. We've got a walking, running, bicycling group that we have on Saturday mornings. Last week we had 12. Some weeks we have 4. Some weeks Dina's there. Some weeks she's not. She's traveling. And so it's this very low-key group of folks that get together. And the reason we do it for an hour is so we can have breakfast together on Saturday morning for an hour. Last weekend there were 5 of Dwyer Group's presidents there, just hanging together. Now, where do you find culture like that? But it starts at the top, and that's what Dina creates. And very seldom do you know where she's going, what she's doing, who she's speaking to. But she has created this culture here that unless someone works here day to day, it's hard to understand. But it's so darn good. And it's so fun to work with this lady. And the senior executives here, too, because they all have it. It's not just Dina alone. She's created this in everybody.
When I was a franchisor back in the days when Ben Franklin was still alive, has it been that long?
That was a sad Stan.
I used to talk ad nauseum about culture because it's the secret sauce that you can't copy. Other brands. I talk about Fred sharing with Blimpie and all the openness, but when you really get down to it, other brands can copy what they can see, and they can replicate what they can view. But I think culture, to me, in a brand is more like what's below the water level on an iceberg. Where the real power lies is in the DNA, and that's the culture. And those are things that aren't evidently visible to everybody, but, man, those are the power behind the things that drive brands. What do you think about that, Mark?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I remember one time I had to do a speech for an emerging franchisor conference out in North Carolina. And I was in the shower, and you all know my wife, Mary Kay. And I'm talking to Mary Kay, and I said, honey, I was like this before I got to Waco, wasn't I? And all of a sudden, I hear this loud laughter in the bathroom. She's like, no, it changed you a lot. And I thought, oh, that's great, because I didn't know the change, but it happened, and it happened for the good. And it happened for the good of me. It happened for the good of my family. It happened for the good of me as a leader, too. And it's just
I don't know that I've ever taken exception with Mary Kay about anything before, but I knew you when you lived in Florida, and you've not changed as much as you're telling me, or our audience you've changed at all. You're still very much you.
Well, thanks, Dan. I appreciate that, and I do miss Florida. And if Dina was speaking in Florida, I'd know all about it. I'll tell you that right now. There's the thing about. I'll give you an example. When you're walking, we've got a campus here, and when you're walking from one building to the other, and if you're walking with Dina, there can be a gum wrapper on the ground that's 20 feet away from her. She'll just walk over, pick it up, and then when we get to the other building, throw in the garbage can. It's one of those things that when you see that happen, you start to do it. And before, you might not even thought about it. But that's that power of the culture that's here. In her book, Live Rich, it's a great culture here.
Truly leading by example, without a doubt, which is the Dina that I know. I know she's always been so giving of her time, as we know within franchising, having been an IFA chairperson. But even beyond that, there isn't a time that you see Dina where there's not a crowd of people around her. And as you brought up that incident about the gum wrapper, I bet she doesn't even say anything about it. Like, oh, look, there's, somebody dropped trash. She just goes over, picks it up, and just continues to move on her way. So, Mark, you talk about change and your own change, and there's a lot of changes that are going on at the Dwyer Group. Recent acquisitions, the private equity company back in the picture. How does the organization maintain its culture with all those changes, all the newness of these brands coming in that obviously had their own cultures, and the transition into the Dwyer Group? I mean, how has it affected everybody? Is it something that's seamless? Is it something that's intentionally addressed? Give us a little bit of insight.
Let's go back to the private equity. When Riverside sold us to TZP, it was a good thing because Riverside had owned us for about 7 years. It was 2.5, 3 years later, they bought us back. And as both you gentlemen know, that just doesn't happen. First of all, private equity companies don't buy anybody back. And if they do, they're going to wait 4, 5, 6 years when the price is just right and snatch it up. Here, we're at all-time high, and they said, we want the company back because we understand the culture there. We understand what's going on there. We want to grow with them. When we just bought Service Brands International a few months ago, the culture that Dave McKinnon had at SBI, I believe, was similar to what's at Dwyer Group. So it was easy to bring the presidents in and the people in. We just finished our reunion in Austin 2 weeks ago, and there are several SBI executives and SBI franchisees, former Molly Maid, Mr. Handyman, Protect Painting franchisees there, and they absolutely loved it because they felt, I think what they felt, it was what they had in Michigan on steroids. Because Dave had a good culture, but now they're seeing 10 brands, this excitement, Dina up there, Mike Bidwell giving a State of the Union of where we are, where we're going to be, people having fun, and they thought, this is cooler than I thought it would be. So when you see that, you get excited, and the momentum just keeps on growing. That's what's happening. And that's what it feels like to be a president here. It is so much fun and so cool to say that, I'm a Dwyer Group president.
Of course, a lot of us in franchising heard about, the tragedy with Doug Rogers, the president of Mr. Appliance, and it's remarkable, his comeback and I love seeing the pictures of your Saturday morning walks. He's there on his bike. I mean, it's certainly well ahead of what doctors even, thought possible. And I know when we talked about this last December when we were on about the Dwyer Group and Dina making plans and remodeling his office, so to speak, to get in with a wheelchair, and it's just you hear stories like that, and it just brings chills to you. But in that process, Mary Kay, your wife, who was a vice president at that time, I believe, with Mr. Plains, basically stepped in seamlessly and handled things. And now, as Five Star Painting was acquired by the Dwyer Group, Mary Kay, in essence, was rewarded for that work and obviously all the other work she did prior to that, and is now president of Five Star. I mean, I hear that, and it just, first of all, there's so many organizations today that won't even allow you to date or have a spouse within the same organization. And here, there's two leaders within the organization that are married. Very open-minded, certainly lends to the culture. How has that affected you and Mary Kay personally in your relationship? Because this has got to be an extension into your home life, because the two of you are leaders within this organization.
I do the cleaning and the dishes a lot more than I used to. No, it's outstanding. Today she's in Calgary, and one of the first things that happened this morning is that we were talking back and forth on a situation that she had to handle today. We've always believed in our marriage that 1 + 1 = 3, because we're both big fans of franchising, both enjoyed it, enjoyed working at Valpak together, and enjoyed hanging out with Joe Bordeaux. In doing that, we've been able to transcend. If there's no difficulties. In fact, we'll bounce stuff off each other. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? It makes us that much better. We believe in the same culture. Our mind beliefs are the same thing. We're both proud to do this. So if anything, I think it's been a wonderful situation. Doug Rogers, as you mentioned, is one of our closest friends. He and his wife were over for dinner last Saturday night with some friends of ours from California. I had a chance to go with Doug on his first trip without his wife Liz out to San Diego about a month and a half ago, and the man's amazing. I guess so. You're going to see Doug. You're going to see Dwyer. You're going to see Mary, who just has been promoted. You're going to see Mary Kay and I. You're going to see all these presidents talk openly all the time. And it really is become a family. When you have 4, 5, 6 presidents hanging out together on a Saturday morning, and there's other things to do, it speaks loudly to it. Mary Kay and I both have our computers on it every night, but that's okay. That's just part of our life.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's culture. Those are the things that you can't force. You can't make people do those kinds of things. Those are the behaviors of people that want to be with each other. That's not because somebody's got a light on or is watching to make sure you're there. You're there because you want to be there.
Absolutely. I'd rather do this in Florida with Dina. but I don't think she's going to move Dwyer Group whatsoever. But it's that much fun,
To Paul's question too, though.
Go ahead.
To Paul's question too about that your lives overlap as spouses as well as executives. That adds a dimension that I'm sure if Mary Matlin and James Carville can figure it out, just about anybody could. But but
they were terrible speakers, weren't they?
But you and Mary Kay are so alike. I mean, again, with all due respect, I pay homage to the culture. You went to a culture that was so much embodied by the way you were before you got there that, to me, it would seem like just going home. Even though it's Waco, okay? So going home, and it's not Florida, but in every other way, where could you be more comfortable than with like-minded people that share vision, values, and ethics?
Yeah, my daughter lives in the Tampa area, so we moved away. And she was in a few weekends ago, and, of course, she walked with us. and had a chance to meet Dina and spend time with Dina, and we had breakfast, and then, of course, Dina was there. And first of November, a bunch of people from Dwyer Group are going down to Haiti for We Light Haiti. It's a project put together by Dwyer Group, Mr. Electric, and Dina, and we can go if we want. We take personal vacation time. We pay $25 a piece out of our pocket if we want to go. But what it's going to be, it's going to be a way to light up some of the houses so that students can learn, they can do their homework at night. Otherwise, these are places that have no electricity whatsoever. And of course, Dina's going, and I'm taking my daughter, and she's in her early 40s, but going with her. So she's so excited about that. And when she comes down here, she sees a lot of the culture we have here, the family that we have here, and she's happy for us. So it's not like, Dad, why'd you leave? It's like, Dad, that's a cool place to live, and I can see how neat it is to work there and live there too.
Hey, by the way, Mark, with all that bragging you were doing about Baylor country, I've got a quote from Dina with reference to her speaking engagement at TCU, and the quote says, "TCU has a special place in my heart. My daughter, Danny, graduated in 2013, and today she's a successful business owner going after her dreams. So this is a true gift for me to return to a campus that I love. We're preparing the next generation of business leaders, and sharing great wisdom from pioneers in the community is happening at the highest levels." So hats off to Dina for being able to spread the love beyond Baylor.
I agree. I agree.
You know, Stan, I never told you the story. I told Mark this. You know, I don't know Mary Kay all that long. I know Mark a little bit longer. And I'd always hear about Mary Kay and Mary Kay and Mary Kay and Mary Kay. And my assumption, not knowing that he was married to Mary Kay, he just referred to her at the Dwyer Group, was that we were talking about Mary Kennedy Thompson, Mary Kay. And
this is why assumption is the mother of all screw-ups.
Oh, my God. Yeah, I was so embarrassed. I'm like, there is a real person behind this. I thought it was somebody different. So
let me tell you this.
No, we're so blessed. We wouldn't have come here without Mary Thompson. We knew Mary from IFA, and I remember sitting down or having Mary Kay sit down with her and say, "All right, tell us the truth. What's it like there?" We hang out with Will and Mary regularly. They become great friends, and we just say, "Well, thanks, Mary, for bringing us to Waco." And she said, "No, it's worked out great for all of us." But yeah, there's it's Mary Thompson's an amazing woman. You know, she was. I can't say she's an ex-Marine because she'll slap my hand with a ruler. Once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine, and so is her husband Will. But the leadership that she embodies, she's been a mentor of mine, and of course she is Mary Kay. And Mary Kay will sit down with her often and talk about things, and I'll see her coming out of this building, and I'll say, "Where were you?" She goes, I was talking to Mary about some stuff. Oh, okay, fine. So it's been good. One more quick story. Yeah, one more quick story that I've got to share. The stuff that Dina does behind the scenes. Doug and I went out to San Diego for something called a secret knock. Dina has been on a mission to help the folks in Waco become better at what they do. For instance, in her new book, Values, Inc., the foreword's by Brian Tracy. There's also part of it from a statement on the front is from Matthew Kelly. Matthew Kelly is a best-selling author in something called Dream Manager. And I would suggest anybody go to YouTube and look up Matthew Kelly, Dream Manager, or Brian Tracy. Brian Tracy came to a reunion as our keynote speaker, but more importantly, we have a series of, I think there's 4 or 5 now of his videos that's available for all Dwyer Group franchisees that we have on our intranet site. Matthew Kelly, she met him, it's a church function, a Catholic church function, and she brought him to Waco to speak to all the executives. So she becomes on this mission, and the Secret Knock is an organization with Greg Reed. She brought Greg Reed in to speak to us too. And it's a very interesting event with some classical entrepreneurs. For instance, the guy who invented Billy Bob Teeth, the guy who invented Pictionary, the guy who started Make-A-Wish Foundation, et cetera, et cetera. There was a young, I shouldn't say young, a middle-aged black lady there that came up to me, and she gave me a hug. She said, "I have to meet you because Carol said I have to meet you." I'm like, "Oh, good." And I said, "Who are you?" She said, "I meet Doug too." "Well, here's Doug." She gives Doug a hug. 4 or 5 years ago, she read about Dina in a magazine, and she wrote Dina a letter saying, "I'm a single mom with 4 kids. Can you teach me how to think middle class?" Middle class. Dina called her and said, "How'd you find my information?" And she said, "Well, I knew where you worked." Dina's become a mentor to her. We flew her in to Waco a few years ago to a board meeting. She stayed at the Hilton, and she said, when I walked in the Hilton, it was like I was Cinderella, all these dreams. Dina brought her in to the board meeting, and since then has been mentoring her. She also paid for her to go to San Diego, paid for the flights, paid for the hotels, paid for the secret knock. And in the past 4 or 5 years now, she's got her degree. She has a good job. And it's all because of stuff that happens behind the scenes. That is culture that only if you're here you really understand.
That's amazing.
Yep. Absolutely remarkable. So, Mark, this week is the Springboard Emerging Franchise Brands Conference in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
Stan is already there. I will be there tomorrow. And, of course, there'll be a lot of wide-eyed new emerging franchisors looking for tidbits of information. With respect to culture, what tidbit of information, what number one tidbit of information would you give them? What would be your best advice for them with respect to culture?
Develop a code of values, or steal ours and give Dina credit, but develop a code of values and live by them. And make sure that in everything you do, you build that code of values. In ours, as you know, are live rich, respect, integrity, customer focus, and having fun. But by having this, what it does, it gives you guidelines. It's kind of like the 10 Commandments, but easier. It is 10 Commandments, but it's a set of guidelines that you do in every one of your decisions. You live according to your code of values and the decisions that you make, and it just makes life a whole lot easier. Your involvement with franchisees, one of ours is listening with the intent to understand what is being said and acknowledging what's said is important to the speaker. How important is that? Or acknowledging everyone was right from their own perspective. So as you sit down with a franchisee and you have different perspectives, you start to realize they're right from their perspective. But it's these code of values that become they become part of your blood. They become part of who you are and how you are. And as a new franchisor, if you can do that, that's number one, and live that, it's going to help. Secondly, don't sell too much territory to the same person at once. And Stan, you know what I'm talking about. You go back to some of the early brands. I've got all of Ohio. Do you really? 20 years later, someone has to all of Ohio. Sell them what they can do to promote your brand.
Well, early stage franchisors tend to sometimes be too enthusiastic about getting those early stage deals done, and sometimes that's just part of the maturity curve. You wind up buying some of that back or trying to get some of that back later, but it would be a much better plan to go in with that, begin with the end in mind mentality that staves off doing those things in the first place.
Yeah, you and I have been there, Stan, on that side of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Stan, I'm here and I'm almost, believe it or not, speechless, thinking about the different things that Mark has just shared with us. And, of course, it just resonates so loud and clear because you and I both are definitely proponents and believers of having the right fit culture in an organization and trying to instill that, not trying to, but the necessity of instilling that with emerging brands. And I work a lot with emerging brands, and this has really been, core for me. And you yesterday had the opportunity of working with, which is now an FRM client too, Jason Griggs over at Max Out. And I hope that you've seen, some of the culture that they're trying to develop. And if we just keep doing this one brand at a time, franchising might be less under attack than it is today.
I shared one nugget with Jason and his partners yesterday about a competitive edge that you don't have to worry about being the small guy on the block all the time when you can equalize the competition that comes from others that might be in your competitive set that already have hundreds of units, and you're just coming out of the gates and you feel like, well, how do I get somebody to look at me when they're comparing me to brands that have dozens or hundreds of units already? And the culture is it's almost a leveler. It will equalize some of those challenges that size and what national ad funds and another brand might be able to do that yours can't do yet. But tell those candidates that are considering affiliation with you, the emerging brand versus the more established brand, to not just look at those material things like the ad fund or the toys or the things that you've got with a little more scale that the younger emerging brand hasn't achieved yet, but look at the culture of who you're getting in business with. Look at whose engine are you taking your wagon and hitching to. Look at the team of people, as small as that team may be, and how happy are they showing up for work every day, or are they just coming there because it's a job and they have to do it? Those are the people that are going to be supporting you halfway across the country from home office. And those, again, are the pieces and parts that brands that have culture instill not only in what they offer to prospective franchisees, but they start by treating their own teams of office personnel properly and making them feel valued and respected. And if those people in the home office don't feel that way, you don't have a prayer, no matter how big or small the brand may be. So it's a great equalizer for smaller emerging brands because they can compete on culture. They can say, I'm not that 100 plus or 200 or 500 plus yet, but let me tell you something. And anybody in this organization's vision, values, and ethics are in total and complete alignment. And I challenge others to show you that they're stronger than we are in that regard. That's a big thing that emerging brands can do if they begin like the Dwyer Group did.
Sure. And also recalling that everybody has to start somewhere, and if they don't believe that, I might remind them of the story about a kid from New York City who wanted to be a doctor, Fred DeLuca in Subway, one location, 44,000. I'm sorry, Mark, I stepped on you there.
No, that's fine. No, you're exactly right. I think of DeLuca. I go back a couple of years. All of a sudden, Menchie's showed up, right? Our friends at Menchie's. And all of a sudden, they were a major sponsor. Like, where did they come from? Who are these guys? Right. You go 1 year, and you don't know who they are. So there's the newest brands. There's brands out there that are going to dominate. They're just going to dominate. But it does come back, guys, with this whole culture thing. In our code of values, I think there's 14 different of them. We start, my staff, this morning there were 3 of us. We start every morning at 8:15 with the code of values. Every morning. We go around and say them. Sometimes we screw them up. We start laughing. But sometimes we start over. But when you do that every day, it becomes a part of you, and it goes back to exactly what you're saying. As an emerging franchisor, if you can start off with just the 2 people, here's how we're going to do it, and then you add a third, and all of a sudden there's 20, and all of a sudden there's 50, and all of a sudden you've got franchisees, and all of a sudden you're a Menchie's, or all of a sudden you're a Dwyer Group, or all of a sudden you're a Subway. It started one day, and that's what I love what the 2 of you are doing and where you're going to be this week. That's outstanding.
Stan, any closing comments or questions for Mark as we wrap up Mark's revisit to Franchise Today?
Just proud to call you friend and proud to call you a peer, and proud that I've known you guys for as long as I have, and we still like each other. That's great.
Is that a newsstand or what? I'm not sure. I love hanging with the two of you guys. You know that it's always coming home in a couple of weeks and seeing a couple of weeks and then going back for the IFA convention. It is going home and seeing great friends. It's an amazing. I think Joe Bordeaux said it. It's the largest Rotary Club in the world, and it is.
Well said. Well,
yeah, very
well said. Well, thanks for being with us today, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
It's always good. I appreciate the invite, and anytime. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Be good and be safe. Well, Stan, as we were talking with Mark for the last half hour, I've started to see new press release after press release come through online, NRN, other organizations announcing IFA President, CEO Steve Caldera stepping down. And, one of the big upcoming events is right around the corner, and I think this announcement took you and I and probably many others by surprise in light of the Franchise Action Network annual meeting, formerly known as Public Affairs Conference, coming up in 2 weeks. And, of course, it is the most important advocacy event of the year. It's coming to Washington, D.C., September 29th and 30th. There are many reasons, especially as franchising is under attack, for people in franchising to attend. Any thoughts about, and I'm taking this off the cuff, and I apologize if I'm hitting you blindsided here, just like I hit Mark blindsided about Dina being at the TCU event. What are your thoughts regarding this? I mean, I'm stumbling over here because I'm still trying to figure out this Franchise Action Network meeting 2 weeks away. Obviously, a lot of preparation leading up to it, and now our leader has stepped down.
Well, I think that it's certainly going to create a stir and a bump in the road, and there'll be a little bit of intrigue and a lot of conversation as to what caused that and why now. But I think that we need to view that from a higher level. And as any franchisor has to be systems reliant, not people dependent. So too does the IFA, and the charge has to continue forward. And franchising, more so than ever before, has faced multiple threats at the state and the national level, with legislation and with unions trying to work their way into forcing co-employment through taking apart the franchise model and calling it something other than it is. This event every year has always been a cornerstone of IFA's attempt to help legislators understand the value proposition that is franchising, the difference that franchising makes at home in their communities. The IFA's event every year, taking franchisors and, more importantly, their franchisees up on Capitol Hill to talk directly with their legislators, help them understand that 700 or 800,000 franchised establishments are supporting over close to 9 million direct jobs, and then $890 billion in economic output, which is about 3% of the gross domestic product, is the result of franchising. And so we've got a small business mentality in our world, but that small business mentality coupled together across brands and market sectors accounts for a big chunk of the GDP. And they're playing with dynamite, messing with our way of doing business. I think there are a couple of quotes on IFA's website that speak directly to why attend this event, and both come from highly esteemed franchising professionals, one as a franchisor and one as a franchisee, and I'm going to read them both to you, Paul, and share them with our audience. Catherine Monson, CEO at Fast Signs, says, "Not everybody understands the franchise model. We need to develop relationships with our representatives and senators because politics is a contact sport. And there are a lot of folks with a lot of different agendas other than ours. So you need to come to Washington to explain and to protect your business by sharing these anecdotes and impacts of what these potential legislation pieces can do to harm or to impact adversely the business that you're trying to build and grow. Another comment on the IFA's website with reference to why attend comes from franchisee Matthew Patankin, who's co-owner and of the Double P Corporation, which is an anti-ANS franchisee. And Matthew says, nothing's more impactful than speaking to your legislator, sitting across the table from them and telling them your personal stories. They really do listen, and you really do make a difference. And Matthew's speaking to is not about franchisors or suppliers, but he's talking about the franchisee, the impact that business owner has sitting across the desk or table from his elected official saying, I'm responsible for these 300 jobs that I've created in the district. I'm responsible for this chunk of the GDP. I'm responsible for building and growing and keeping my business and the families of those I employ protected and safe, and it's your job to keep me feeling that so I can keep growing my business. Who better than a franchisee to be able to share that message with the elected official, because that franchisee represents a lot of clout and power and elected or votes back home in the district. So this message it's always been important. This conference has always been important. But with the level of attack that franchising has been put under, more now than ever, the grassroots impact of franchisees having their feet on the street and up on the hill and keeping appointments en masse with others from their state and from their districts whose collective voices sit down in front of their senators and their congressmen and their staffs to share the impact of these existential threats against our business model. There's no more powerful way to demonstrate with clarity the voice of franchising than to participate in this event. And it's coming up on the 28th and 29th the 29th and 30th of September. And if you're not already registered, please go to the IFA website at franchise.org and hit the events tab and pull down all the information you'll need to see what the agenda looks like, to see who is sponsoring the event, who's participating, and how you and your franchisees can contribute to the need for our collective voice to be heard on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, and even more important today, in light of Steve Caldera's leaving the IFA, all of these politicians are aware of it. It's on their radar. We really need to have a strong presence in Washington. And if you've never been before, understand that, the IFA will prep you before your meeting. And this year they have a soapbox consulting to provide even more guidance on having an effective visit through a professional advocacy training panel during the program. They'll schedule all of your appointments on Capitol Hill. They also, expect to hear from the soapbox team to discuss your meetings after you register so you can make the most of your day on the Hill, because I know a lot of people that have never been can be very intimidated by it. And that's not a reason, especially now, it's not a reason to not attend and be a participant and be active.
I'm going to take it a step further, Paul, and I know that many that I speak with have felt that maybe IFA's gotten a bit acerbic and is, these messages that go out and the talk about the threats are sometimes viewed politically instead of economically. And I would suggest that it doesn't matter what your political, moral, or social compasses tell you, or whether you believe that the right or the left is right or wrong. Look past that noise, and to me that is noise. The existential threat of the business model transcends politics Don't make this about politics. Make this about your business. Make this about the preservation and protection of your business. For all the years that I've done my work in diversity, I've never looked at what I do as something that I'll try to impact your belief in by virtue of your moral, political, or social compass. My case has always been about the business sense, the business case, that if you're in communities that your company can do business in that don't reflect the communities that they're in by putting franchisees into your stores and into your units and operating in markets that reflect the communities that they're serving, someone else will. And that to me has always been about the business case for diversity. And here I similarly suggest that you look at the need to participate in this event, not socially, morally, or politically. Look at it, the business case to protect the brand of franchising, which is clearly in danger of the way business is done in our business model could be up for grabs if we just sit on our hands. Now is not the time to do that.
Yeah, perfectly said. And we're starting to get to the top of the hour, and next week we continue on our path to sustainable and sensible franchising. Our guest will be Brian Summers of Jersey Mike's, another organization with a phenomenal culture. And then following up the next week will be Josh Wall from Christian Brothers Automotive. I had the distinct pleasure and honor of attending an event at Christian Brothers Automotive here in the Houston area last week. It's also got a tremendous culture. So Stan, two great guests coming up, and an exciting time for franchising on Franchise Today. And of course, anybody that's going to be at the Springboard Emerging Franchisers event in Philadelphia tonight, or the cocktails tomorrow is the full day of event, and it wraps up on Friday. Look for Stan or I. We'd love to talk with you. If you have any suggestions as far as future guests or topics, certainly send them our way. Any parting words, Stan?
No, great opportunity today to share the relationship that we both enjoy with Mark Liston. Happy and proud that he was able to participate with us today. And we've got a very busy week ahead of us here for the next couple of days in Philadelphia, meeting with old and new friends, and there will be a cross-section here of opportunity to hear from successful brands that are in the emerging category, and for they as well to be able to hear from some legacy and established brands that are good enough to come share some of their intellectual capital and help some of these emerging brands have a look at the glide path that they could be on by learning from the kind of intellectual capital they're going to expose themselves to here for the next couple of days.
Right. So until next week with Brian Summers as our guest, this is Franchise Today, wishing you the best, the very best in this great, great thing we refer to as franchising. Franchise Today is out. Yeah, very well done, my friend.
When it's PCS time, you know the drill. Pack, research to new base, get the kids in school, because family supports family. At American Public University, we support military families with flexible, affordable online education that moves with you. As a military spouse, your tuition rate is the same as your partner's, just $250 per credit hour. American Public University, education that moves with you. Learn more at apu.apus.edu/military.